Okay.
2 billion years ago, was there TVs and cars?
No.
Why would
All right. So yesterday, your daily science, you had 2 vocabulary words. And those words are really important for us to understand how the Grand Canyon was formed and how a lot of other landforms were formed. So the first word was erosion. What is erosion? Harper, what is it?
removing of rocks and soil by water, wind, ice, or gravity?
Very good. It's when water, wind, ice, or gravity moves the earth. Not the whole entire earth, but the dirt, the rocks, the soil. It moves the ground by natural forces. And those natural forces could be water. Where would water come from? What's one place that the water could come from, Harper?
Rivers.
Could come from rivers. What else, Dylan? Okay.
Springs.
Springs, very good. Caden? Okay. Cadence? Rain. So it could be from bodies of water like oceans, rivers, streams. It could be from an underground spring, or it could be from rain. And also the wind, and if there's ice, and gravity can also cause erosion. What's the other vocabulary word that you had? What's the other one, Olivia?
Weathering.
Weathering. Very good. Weathering is what?
Is where like it gets warm and hot. It's
No.
like different layers of the thing.
Not exactly. Weathering has something to do with erosion. We're not talking about the weather like the temperature outside or the sunshine. Something a little bit different. What is the definition of weathering, Dylan?
The definition was breaking down rocks and breaking down or wearing away of rocks by water and wind.
Very good. Weathering is the breaking down or wearing away of rocks by water or wind. So weathering is what actually happens to break the rocks or the soil apart. And then the erosion is when those broken pieces are moved away. So in this little short paragraph that you read, it tells you that the Grand Canyon was formed by erosion and weathering. And it also tells you that some of the rocks could be as much as 2 billion years old. And we've discussed that that timeline might or might not be true. But we do know, based on what we've learned, what were the first layers? The oldest ones. Which ones are the oldest? Ansley? Yeah, see, the one down there on the bottom. Those are the oldest layers. All right, so let's take a look over on the television. I've got a picture here of some rocks. What do you notice about those rocks? What do they have? What do they have, Caden? They have holes in them. I want you to take a minute to think about why those rocks might have holes in them. Cadence, why do you think those rocks might have holes in them? Okay, what are you thinking, Cadence? Maybe they're really old, Olivia? Maybe they're coral, okay. Dylan, what do you think?
Maybe it's bones.
It's not bones, they're rocks. What are you thinking, Harper?
I'm thinking that they have holes in them to like maybe they were drilled out of the layer.
That's a good idea, except the holes in these were caused by natural processes. It wasn't a person drilling holes through them. So what kind of natural processes could cause rocks?
Well, I would
to-
just say
have holes in them? What are you thinking?
I was thinking that over time it just started becoming different shapes and stuff.
Okay, so it did happen over a long period of time. You're right about that, but what in the world would make holes in rocks? What do you think, Olivia?
Water and sand.
Water. Definitely could have been water. What else? What are you thinking, Dylan? Decaying? What would cause rocks to decay? Think about a rock. Is a rock something soft?
No.
No, they're really hard, aren't they? Would it be easy to break a rock?
No.
Would it be easy to put a hole in a rock? What do you think, Justice? Okay. Have you ever seen a plant growing through the side of, on the side of a mountain where it's rock? Okay. Have you seen, I know sidewalks aren't actual rock, but have you seen plants growing up through sidewalks? Kind of the same thing happens sometimes with rocks. Sometimes plants grow up. Sometimes, like we've said, that there's water can drip on them, and constant water dripping will eventually weather the rocks and make holes in them. All right? There's what? Concrete is not a rock, but it's hard like rock, so we can think about that when we're thinking about what would happen. Yeah, that happens. All right, so we're going to look at, we've talked about weathering already. Weathering is when a force, a natural force like water, wind, ice, or gravity, acts on a rock and breaks it into smaller pieces. So, look at that picture. We saw that picture of Deer Creek Falls back at the beginning of us studying the Grand Canyon. That's a waterfall called Deer Creek Falls that's in the Grand Canyon. Thinking about what we know about rocks and weathering, what do you think? Do you think that something like that could cause those rocks to have holes in them?
Maybe.
Yeah. What do you think? What are you thinking, Olivia?
Maybe they were like on the beach. Maybe they were on like the shore. Maybe they were under the water.
Okay. Do you think that water's falling softly or really hard?
Hard.
It's coming with a lot of force, isn't it? So do you think that those rocks that are underneath the waterfall would weather faster or slower?
Faster.
Yes,
Well,
definitely.
I was about to say that I thought that the rocks might have been under like a waterfall or something. Over time, with the water hitting the rocks, it just started making holes in it.
Exactly. That water is falling with a lot of force, so that would definitely break down the rocks faster than a rock that wasn't close to a force like that. So we've talked about this already. What causes rocks to break? What are some things that would cause rocks to break, Ansley? Justice? What are you thinking? Uh-huh. Water? Cadence? Okay. Harper? Hard winds, hard waterfalls, being moved around a lot. Okay. What are you thinking, Dylan?
But it could be frozen in ice, and then when you take it out, it could be snow.
Okay. So ice, really extreme weather. All right. So now let's talk about what happens after those rocks break apart. They have those holes in them. They've broken apart. They're in smaller pieces. Where do they go? What happens then, Olivia?
Pretty sure they turn into sand.
Okay, they might turn into sand. All right, is that what you were going to say? Does anybody have another idea? Owen?
Maybe they will just sit there and eventually get hold of them too.
Okay, so maybe they just sit there. Maybe they move down like to the bottom of the water there. What are you thinking, Brayley? Smaller pieces and they move to different places? How would they move? What would move them? Water. Okay, water or the wind. Moving water could definitely move them. The wind could move them, especially if they're really small pieces. So we said that the wind and moving water are some things that can move weathered rock. Can you think of anything else that might move this weathered rock? Could people move it? Yeah. Who's ever been somewhere and picked up rocks to take with them? Yeah. So that could happen, right?
That's what we do on vacation.
Yeah. A lot of people like to collect rocks. You see something that looks really neat. So people could pick them up. The wind could blow it. Could big machines move them? Yeah. Yeah, like backhoes, bulldozers, those type of things. So let's look at this word, erosion. We talked about it at the very beginning. Erosion is what? What is it, Ansley? Very good. It's the process that moves the weathered rock. Once the rock has broken down into smaller pieces or even into sand, erosion is the process that actually moves it to a different place. So here's another word. Sediment. Based on what we've talked about what weathering is. We've talked about erosion. Does anybody have a prediction about what sediment might be? We talked about the rock breaking down. We talked about it moving to another place. So does anybody have an idea what sediment might be? Owen, what are you thinking? Well, weathering's the breaking down of rocks. And erosion is those broken down pieces being moved. So sediment is the actual weathered rock that has been carried away. So it gets broken down through the process of weathering. It moves from that place to another place by erosion. And then the sediment is when it gets to its new location, then that becomes sediment. And we're going to talk more about sediment as we go along. So where do you think that it all goes? Where do you think that the sediment would go? What are you thinking, Olivia?
Maybe it would go into the ground and turn into soil.
Okay, maybe it moves to, and it settles on the ground and becomes soil somewhere else in a different location. All right, what are you thinking, Owen?
Maybe it will just wash up on land somewhere.
Okay, just washes up somewhere else. Anybody else have an idea of where it goes? What are you thinking, Dylan?
Wherever the river, creek, ocean, wherever it takes it.
Wherever it takes it, yeah. Okay, what are you thinking? All right. All right. So I want you to just think about this. You don't have to draw a sketch or take a picture. But I do, when you go home, or even when you're out on the playground, I want you to look around and see if you can find evidence of erosion around you. See if it's not going to look like the Grand Canyon, is it? But I want you to see if you can find some places where erosion has taken place. And we'll talk about that tomorrow. You could if you wanted to.